Get ready to dive into the explosive world of covert Mossad operations on U.S. soil. Behind closed doors, shocking conspiracies and secret missions are unleashed that will have you questioning everything about international espionage. From missing nuclear materials to shadowy influence tactics, this is the untold story of Mossad's most controversial operations in America. Don't miss out on these jaw-dropping revelations that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Chapter 1. Operation Susanna, the Lavon Affair's American Connection. The year was 1954. The Cold War was heating up, and the Middle East was a battlefield of shifting alliances and silent betrayals. Deep within the clandestine corridors of Israeli intelligence, a covert operation was unfolding, one that would not only shatter diplomatic ties, but also expose a ruthless willingness to manipulate allies. Officially, it was known as Operation Susanna. Unofficially, it was a secret war waged in the shadows, with fingerprints that stretched beyond the Middle East, reaching straight into the heart of the United States. Cairo, Egypt. A series of bombings rippled through the city, striking American and British targets. Cinemas, libraries, and cultural centers, places associated with the West, went up in flames. Panic set in. The immediate assumption? Radical anti-Western insurgents, possibly backed by the Soviets or Egypt's nationalist leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser. But the truth was far more insidious. The bombers weren't Egyptian extremists. They weren't Soviet operatives. They were Israelis, recruited by Mossad's covert network and trained for sabotage. Their mission? To incite chaos and push the British and Americans away from Egypt, preventing any possible alliance with Nasser's growing power. The plan was simple. Make it seem like local radicals were attacking Western interests, forcing the U.S. and Britain to see Nasser as a dangerous, uncontrollable force. It was the perfect false flag operation, until it all went horribly wrong. One by one, the operatives were caught. Under brutal Egyptian interrogations, they confessed. The scandal broke wide open, sending shockwaves through the Israeli government. The world now knew Israel had attempted to sabotage its own allies. Defense Minister Pinchas Lavon, the alleged mastermind, was forced to resign in disgrace, though whispers suggested he had merely been the scapegoat. Others higher up had given the order. But the real story, the one never officially acknowledged, was how deep this deception ran, and how far beyond Egypt it extended. While Operation Susanna, later infamously called the Lavon Affair, played out in Egypt, there were reports that similar influence operations were unfolding in the United States. These weren't bombings, but intelligence efforts, manipulations, covert influence campaigns. Declassified CIA and FBI documents later hinted at Israeli attempts to shape American policy through propaganda and clandestine lobbying. In the 1950s, Israel was still a fledgling state, heavily dependent on U.S. support. But Washington was hesitant, balancing its interests between Israel and the oil-rich Arab world. Mossad saw this hesitation as a threat. The solution? Shift American public opinion. Israeli operatives, possibly linked to the same handlers behind the Lavon affair, were allegedly involved in pressuring politicians, funding pro-Israel advocacy groups, and even planting favorable narratives in newspapers. In the deep freeze of the Cold War, when fear was currency, they played the most dangerous game, covert psychological warfare on American soil. While the Lavon affair had been a spectacular failure in Egypt, its strategic thinking, the blueprint of sabotage, disinformation, and covert influence, did not die. It evolved. If bombing American targets abroad was too risky, then the battlefield would shift. The war would move to the United States, not with explosives, but with deception, blackmail, and control over information. It was no coincidence that in the years following Lavon's resignation, Israeli intelligence expanded its operations in the U.S. networks of informants, deep cover operatives, and lobbying efforts intensified. FBI files from the late 1950s and 1960s show growing concern over foreign intelligence activities, particularly in Washington. Agents flagged suspicious meetings between Israeli diplomats and high-ranking officials. Certain American journalists, previously neutral on Middle Eastern affairs, suddenly became staunch defenders of Israeli policies. Funds moved through shadowy channels, backing candidates and media outlets that favored Israeli interests. A slow, patient infiltration was taking place, and it all traced back to the logic of Operation Susanna. The Lavon affair officially ended with trials, executions, and diplomatic fallout. Egypt publicly hanged 2 of the captured Israeli operatives, and Israel's government fractured under internal scandals. But Mossad learned a crucial lesson. Direct action could fail, but indirect influence could shape the future. In the decades that followed, this strategy became more refined, more sophisticated. The Israeli intelligence doctrine shifted away from the crude sabotage of the 1950s toward high-level espionage, economic leverage, and deep cover operations. From the Lavon affair to later controversies, like the NUMEC nuclear material smuggling scandal, the Pollard-Espionage case, and the AIPAC spy allegations, one thing remained constant: a willingness to act, even against the world's most powerful nation, if it meant securing Israel's survival. And so, the story of Operation Susanna is not just about the failed bombings in Egypt. It is about the quiet war that followed, the one fought in the corridors of Washington, in the back rooms of news agencies, in the whispered deals of lobbyists. A war that never ended. Chapter 2. Operation Damocles, targeting U.S. arms dealers supplying Egypt. In the early 1960s, the Middle East was a cauldron of tension and ambition. Egypt, under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, was fervently advancing its military capabilities, aiming to assert dominance in the region. Central to this ambition was a clandestine missile development program, bolstered by the expertise of former German scientists who had once propelled the Nazi war machine. This unsettling alliance did not go unnoticed. Israel did not want a missile-armed Egypt and resolved to act decisively. Thus commenced Operation Damocles, a covert campaign orchestrated by Mossad to neutralize the burgeoning threat. The Egyptian Missile Initiative gained international attention in July 1962 when Egypt successfully test-fired rockets and showcased them in a grand parade through Cairo. These rockets, ominously named Al-Zafar, the Victorious, and Al-Kahir, the Conqueror, were reportedly capable of reaching deep into Israeli territory. The technological leap was largely attributed to the cadre of German scientists, many of whom had honed their skills during World War II, now repurposing their expertise for Egypt's military aspirations. Mossad perceived this development as an immediate and intolerable threat. The prospect of advanced missile technology in the hands of a hostile neighbor was a scenario Israel could not afford to ignore. Under the leadership of Isser Harel, Mossad initiated a covert operation aimed at disrupting and dismantling Egypt's missile program by targeting the very individuals who made it possible. The campaign's methods were as varied as they were ruthless. One of the most chilling tactics employed was the use of letter bombs. In November 1962, a parcel addressed to Professor Wolfgang Pils, a key figure in the missile program, detonated in his Cairo office. While Pils survived, the explosion claimed the lives of several of his colleagues and instilled a pervasive sense of fear among the expatriate scientific community. The message was unmistakable. Collaboration with Egypt's military endeavors carried lethal risks. The terror was not confined to Egyptian soil. In Europe, individuals associated with the missile project found themselves under siege. Heinz Krug, a Munich-based industrialist supplying materials to Egypt, vanished without a trace in September 1962. Rumors swirled, suggesting he had been abducted and eliminated by Mossad operatives, though concrete evidence remained elusive. The disappearance sent shockwaves through the network of suppliers and scientists, casting a long shadow over any who might consider aiding Egypt's ambitions. Mossad's reach extended beyond physical intimidation. Psychological warfare became a cornerstone of Operation Damocles. Scientists received ominous phone calls, their families were surveilled, and anonymous threats infiltrated their daily lives. The relentless pressure eroded morale, leading many to reconsider their involvement. Some hastily terminated their contracts, fleeing Egypt under the cover of darkness, while others sought protection from their home governments, igniting diplomatic tensions on an international scale. The operation's audacity was matched by its complexity. In one instance, Mossad agents masquerading as journalists approached Dr. Hans Kleinwachter, a propulsion expert. Feigning interest in his work, they lured him into a false sense of security before attempting an abduction. Though the plot was foiled, the encounter left Kleinwachter shaken and served as a stark warning to his peers. In February 1963, two Mossad operatives were apprehended in Switzerland after threatening the daughter of a German scientist collaborating with Egypt. Their arrest exposed the covert operation, leading to international outcry and straining Israel's diplomatic relations, particularly with West Germany. The political fallout was swift and severe. Isser Harel faced mounting pressure and ultimately resigned from his position as head of Mossad, marking a premature end to Operation Damocles. The American connection to Operation Damocles was subtle but significant. While Mossad primarily targeted German scientists working for Egypt, there were allegations that Israeli operatives also pressured U.S. companies and engineers involved in defense contracts that could indirectly benefit Nasser's missile program. Some American firms supplying advanced technology, particularly aerospace components, found themselves under quiet scrutiny. Key individuals reportedly received anonymous warnings, urging them to reconsider their dealings with Egyptian-linked projects. Though no direct attacks on American soil were officially confirmed, whispers of economic coercion, threats, and behind-the-scenes diplomatic maneuvering suggested that Mossad's influence extended beyond Europe, ensuring that even in the United States, aiding Egypt's military ambitions came with unseen but very real consequences. Despite its abrupt conclusion, the operation yielded significant results. The sustained campaign of intimidation and violence sowed deep discord within Egypt's missile program. Many foreign experts, unnerved by the escalating danger, severed their ties and returned to Europe. The exodus of critical personnel crippled the initiative, stalling Egypt's progress and delaying its missile capabilities by years. Chapter 3. The Jonathan Pollard Espionage Scandal. The year was 1984. Jonathan J. Pollard, a disgruntled U.S. Navy intelligence analyst with a messianic zeal for Israel, slipped into a Washington synagogue. His eyes darted across the pews until they landed on Steve Stern, a congregant rumored to have ties to Israeli officials. Pollard leaned in, his voice trembling. "I have access to secrets that could save Israel. I want to help." Within days, he was handed a phone number for Colonel Aviam Sella, an Israeli war hero turned spy recruiter. Thus began one of the most brazen espionage operations in U.S. history, a saga of greed, betrayal, and diplomatic carnage. Pollard, raised in a fiercely Zionist household, had long fantasized about serving Israel. By 1984, he'd wormed his way into the Naval Intelligence Command, his security clearance granting him access to vaults of classified data. But Pollard seethed. He believed the U.S. was withholding critical intelligence from Israel, details on Soviet-armed shipments to Syria, Iraq's chemical weapons, and PLO hideouts. To him, America's ally was being left defenseless. Or so he told himself. His first meeting with Sella was straight out of a spy thriller. At a Washington Hilton coffee shop, Pollard handed over 48 stolen documents. Sella, impressed, reported to his superiors in Lachem, a shadowy Israeli scientific intelligence unit operating outside Mossad's jurisdiction. Led by Rafi Eitan, a veteran spy with a reputation for ruthlessness, Lachem saw Pollard as a perishable asset to be milked dry. Cash payments flowed. $2,500 monthly, a diamond engagement ring for Pollard's wife, and luxury trips to Paris. But the Israelis demanded more, always more. Pollard's apartment became a photocopying hub. Suitcases stuffed with classified files, satellite imagery of Tunisian PLO headquarters, Soviet nuclear codes, Pakistani atomic secrets were smuggled to dead drops. Over 17 months, he leaked 1,500 intelligence summaries and 800 top-secret documents, enough to fill a 40-cubic-meter room. His handlers, drunk on the hall, ignored warnings about his recklessness. Even when Pollard began peddling secrets to South Africa and Taiwan, they looked the other way. By late 1985, the FBI had noticed. Pollard's sudden wealth, designer suits, Rolex watches, raised alarms. Surveillance teams tailed him 24/7. Panicking, Pollard called Sella, who ordered him to flee to Israel. On November 21st, Pollard and his wife raced their Ford Mustang toward the Israeli embassy in D.C., documents spilling from their truck. "I'm an Israeli agent. Grant me asylum," Pollard screamed at the gates. But embassy guards, clueless about Lockham's rogue operation, slammed the doors. FBI agents swarmed, arresting the couple as they knelt on the pavement. Meanwhile, Pollard's handlers vanished. Sella fled to Europe. Lockham operatives Elon Ravid and Yossi Yeager escaped via Mexico and Canada. Back in Israel, Rafi Eitan coolly remarked, "Pollard's job is to sit in prison and stay silent." The betrayal was complete. The U.S. demanded answers. Israel's response? A cascade of lies. Prime Minister Shimon Peres called it a rogue operation, while Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin feigned ignorance. But evidence pointed higher. Lockham reported directly to the Defense Ministry. Worse, Israel refused to return stolen documents, only surrendering low-level files to appease Washington. The U.S. intelligence community erupted. Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, in a scorching 46-page memo, accused Pollard of treason and urged the judge to impose a life sentence. "He should be hanged," Weinberger later spat. The damage was staggering. Pollard had exposed U.S. signal intelligence methods, compromised agents, and handed Israel the NSA's playbook. Even allies couldn't be trusted. Secrets shared with Israel might leak to the Soviets or Arab states. Israel's punishment? A slap on the wrist. Sella was promoted to command a major airbase. Eitan became CEO of a state-owned chemical giant. Meanwhile, Pollard rotted in solitary confinement, abandoned by the country he'd idolized. When Israel finally granted him citizenship in 1995, it was a hollow gesture. Too little, too late. The Pollard affair left a permanent scar. U.S.-Israel. Intelligence sharing froze. American Jews faced renewed dual loyalty smears. Yet, Israel's audacity stunned even veterans. "The most unprofessional espionage case I've encountered," fumed Samuel Lewis, U.S. ambassador to Israel. Lockham's blunders, recruiting a loose cannon, involving his wife, fleeing like amateurs, exposed a shocking arrogance. "They risked far more than they could ever gain," Lewis seethed. Decades later, the wound festers. Pollard's 2015 release did little to soothe U.S. fury. Declassified CIA files reveal Israel's true target. Not just Arab threats, but American secrets. A 1987 damage assessment showed Lockham sought U.S. signals manuals to spy on Soviet advisors in Syria. Proof Israel exploited Pollard to bypass official intelligence channels. In the end, Pollard was no hero. He was a pawn in a reckless game, sacrificed by a nation that preached loyalty but practiced betrayal. And as his handlers toasted their promotions in Tel Aviv, the U.S.-Israel alliance stood cracked, a monument to the cost of hubris. Chapter 4, Operation Trojan, Manipulating U.S. Intelligence Before the Gulf War. The smoke hadn't yet cleared from La Belle Discotheque in West Berlin when the whispers began. It was April 5th, 1986. 2 U.S. soldiers lay dead, 229 wounded, their blood mingling with shattered glass and disco beats silenced by terror. Within hours, intercepted cables crackled through U.S. intelligence channels. Libyan agents in East Berlin had orchestrated the blast. President Reagan's fist slammed the table. Retaliation. But buried in the chaos was a darker question. Who really pulled the strings? Enter Viktor Ostrovsky, Mossad's rogue scribe, a man who claimed to have danced with shadows. In his 1994 book, The Other Side of Deception, he spun a tale of cold-blooded manipulation. Months before the Berlin attack, he alleged Mossad operatives planted a radio relay device, codenamed Trojan, in a Tripoli apartment. Its purpose? To mimic Libyan terror cells, fabricating transmissions that would lure the U.S. into war. The plan was diabolically simple: frame Gaddafi. Ostrovsky described Mossad's obsession with destabilizing Libya, a regime that funded Palestinian militants and defied Western influence. By feeding falsified intel to U.S. eavesdroppers, Israel spies could ignite Reagan's wrath and let American bombs finish the job. Ostrovsky's claims slithered into the light like a venomous secret. A former Mossad case officer, he'd trained in the art of katsa, recruiting assets, weaving lies, vanishing into aliases. But after 14 months, he was cast out, branded a traitor. His revenge? Exposing Mossad's twisted ideals in print. Critics dismissed him as a fabulist. Israeli officials called his books 95% lies, while the Mossad smeared him as an alcoholic, a failed spy. Yet fragments of his story aligned with eerie precision. The U.S. had intercepted Libyan cables, but Ostrovsky insisted they were Mossad forgeries, designed to mimic Gaddafi's operatives. Even the Stasi archives, opened after German reunification, revealed Libyan agents in East Berlin, but their links to the disco bombing remained murky, a fog of Cold War paranoia. The stage was set. On April 14, 1986, Reagan greenlit Operation El Dorado Canyon, a midnight raid. F-111 bombers streaked from UK bases, detouring 2,600 miles around France and Spain, their pilots fueled by amphetamines and revenge. Over Tripoli, the sky erupted. Laser-guided 82 Malawian Quachas bombs obliterated Gaddafi's Azizia barracks, supposedly his terror command center. Flames swallowed military airfields, naval bases, and, tragically, civilian homes. Among the dead, Gaddafi's 15-month-old daughter, Hannah. Or was she? Rumors swirled that her death was a hoax, a propaganda gambit. Libyan radars slept until the bombs fell. No alarms, no defenses, as Ostrovsky later wrote. The perfect strike requires a perfect patsy. But why believe a man labeled a liar? Ostrovsky's critics pounced. His brief Mossad tenure, his grudge, the convenient lack of corroboration. Yet eerie parallels lingered. In 1983, Mossad had allegedly withheld intel about the Beirut barracks bombing, letting 241 U.S. Marines die to protect a source. Now Ostrovsky claimed history repeated. Mossad's Trojan device wasn't just a radio, it was a ghost, whispering lies into America's ear. Even the U.S. raid reeked of manipulation. France denied airspace, forcing bombers into a grueling 13-hour flight. Coincidence? Or had Mossad's allies, or enemies, orchestrated the delay, ensuring Gaddafi's forces stayed vulnerable? The aftermath was a hall of mirrors. Reagan hailed the strike as a blow against terrorism. Gaddafi vowed vengeance. But in the intelligence underworld, doubts festered. Former CIA analyst Victor Marchetti later mused. The evidence against Libya was flimsy, but Reagan wanted a win. Ostrovsky's allegations, though unproven, refused to die. In 1996, German prosecutors reopened the La Belle case and convicted a Libyan spy. Yet questions remained. Why did Stasi files hint at Syrian involvement? Why did Ostrovsky's Trojan tail align with known Mossad tactics, false flags, psychological warfare, assassination squads? Today, Operation El Dorado Canyon is a footnote, a successful strike that birthed forever wars. But in the shadows, Ostrovsky's warning lingers. The Mossad doesn't serve Israel. It serves itself. Was the Trojan real? A phantom? Or a metaphor for the dark symbiosis between spies and statesmen? The truth, like Ostrovsky himself, remains elusive, a ghost in the machine, laughing as empires burn. Chapter 5. The Arnon Milchan Affair. Hollywood producer and Mossad operative. Beneath the glittering facade of Hollywood's red carpets and blockbuster premieres lurked a shadowy underworld of nuclear espionage, where one man straddled both realms with chilling ease. Arnon Milchan, producer of Pretty Woman, Fight Club, and 12 Years a Slave, was no ordinary mogul. He was a spy, a smuggler, and a key architect of Israel's clandestine nuclear arsenal, operating under the radar for decades while rubbing shoulders with A-listers like Robert De Niro and Brad Pitt. Milchan's story begins not in Tinseltown, but in the covert corridors of Israeli intelligence. Recruited in the 1960s by Shimon Peres, then a rising defense official, Milchan joined Lachem, a secretive unit tasked with stealing technology for Israel's nuclear program. His mission: procure materials to turn Israel into a nuclear power, no matter the cost. "I did it for my country, and I'm proud of it," he later declared, grinning like a Bond villain on Israeli TV. By day, Milchan built a fertilizer empire. By night, he orchestrated a global smuggling network, setting up 30 shell companies across 17 countries to funnel Krytrons, missile parts, and uranium to Israel. One operation, codenamed Project Pinto, saw his front company, Heli Trading, ship 800 Krytrons, capable of detonating atomic bombs, from California to Israel in the 1980s. When U.S. authorities finally caught wind, they indicted an underling, Kelly Smith, but let Milchan slip away unscathed. In the 1970s, Milchan pivoted to Hollywood, using his film empire as a smokescreen. Directors like Martin Scorsese and stars like Angelina Jolie had no idea their producer was moonlighting as a spy. Sometimes it gets mixed up, Milchan shrugged, describing how he juggled movie budgets with arms deals. Even Robert De Niro, who starred in Milchan's The King of Comedy, sensed something off. I asked him once, De Niro recalled. He said, "I'm Israeli, of course I'd do these things for my country." The FBI nearly unraveled Milchan's web in 1985 after discovering his role in smuggling nuclear triggers. But the Reagan administration dropped the case, a glaring example of U.S. authorities turning a blind eye to Israel's infiltration of American industries. Milchan's visa was briefly revoked, but allies in high places, including Benjamin Netanyahu, later intervened to restore it. Milchan's ties to Netanyahu ran deep. The two were close friends, almost brothers, bonded by secret missions for the country. But their camaraderie hit a transactional rot. Between 2011 and 2016, Milchan allegedly lavished Netanyahu and his wife Sarah with $191,000 in gifts, crates of pink champagne, Cuban cigars, jewelry, and designer shirts. In return, Netanyahu lobbied the U.S. to renew Milchan's visa and pushed legislation benefiting the producer's business empire. At Netanyahu's corruption trial in 2023, Milchan testified via video link from a Brighton hotel, his face projected onto screens in a Jerusalem courtroom. Shalom, Bibi, he greeted the prime minister as anti-Netanyahu protests erupted outside. Prosecutors accused Milchan of lying under oath, his testimony contradicting earlier police statements. Yet the trial's most explosive revelation wasn't the bribes. It was the unspoken truth that Milchan's espionage had long been encouraged by Israel's power brokers. For decades, Milchan operated with impunity. His companies violated U.S. export laws. His associates faced prison, yet he remained untouched. Even after openly admitting his role in Israel's nuclear program in 2013, he faced no consequences. The U.S. State Department, wary of antagonizing a key ally, let his crimes fade into obscurity. Meanwhile, Israel's nuclear ambiguity, a policy of neither confirming nor denying its arsenal, shielded Milchan's deeds from scrutiny. The Dimona reactor, built with technology he helped steal, remains a black box, its secrets buried beneath the Negev desert. Today, Milchan lives in a Sussex mansion, far from the fallout of his actions. Netanyahu's trial grinds on, but the larger story of how a Hollywood titan enabled a nuclear rogue state remains half-told. Documents about Lockeham's operations are still classified. Witnesses vanish. Evidence is sealed. As the world fixates on red carpet scandals, the real thriller unfolds in the shadows. A tale of unchecked espionage, geopolitical complicity, and a man who proved that even in Hollywood, the darkest scripts are written off-screen. Chapter 6, the AIPAC espionage case, Shadows in the Halls of Power. It began with a whisper in the dark corridors of the Pentagon. A trusted analyst, Lawrence Franklin, hunched over classified documents, his fingers trembling as he copied secrets meant for Israeli eyes. The year was 2004, and the FBI was closing in on a web of intrigue that would expose a daring espionage operation, one that stretched from the offices of Washington's most powerful pro-Israel lobby to the heart of U.S. national security. Lawrence Franklin wasn't just another mid-level bureaucrat, a Iran policy specialist in the Pentagon's Near East Bureau. He had access to classified presidential directives and sensitive deliberations on Iran. But Franklin harbored a dangerous obsession, a visceral hatred for the Iranian regime. By 2002, he'd begun slipping secrets to two lobbyists from AIPAC, Steve Rosen, a sharp-tongued policy director, and Keith Weissman, an Iran analyst. The trio met in dimly lit restaurants, exchanging whispers over lunch. No documents changed hands, only words, spoken softly, carrying the weight of treason. The FBI had been watching. For years, agents tracked Franklin's meetings with Nair Gilan, an Israeli diplomat and Iran nuclear specialist. Wiretaps caught Franklin divulging classified intel on U.S. troop vulnerabilities in Iraq and White House strategies to destabilize Iran. But the most damning evidence came in July 2004, when the FBI staged a sting. They fed Franklin fabricated intelligence about an Iranian plot to assassinate Israelis in Iraq. Desperate to prove his loyalty, Franklin relayed the bogus threat to Weissman, who panicked and alerted Israeli officials. The trap snapped shut. AIPAC was no ordinary lobbying group. Dubbed the most influential foreign policy lobby in Washington, it operated with the precision of a shadow government. But behind its polished facade lay darker ties. FBI raids in 2004 uncovered a trove of classified documents in AIPAC's offices, linking the group to a decades-old pattern of Israeli espionage. One file revealed that an Israeli intelligence operative had infiltrated AIPAC staff, stealing trade secrets to sabotage U.S. industries opposed to Israeli policies. The Franklin case was no aberration. It echoed the 1985 Jonathan Pollard scandal, where a U.S. naval analyst sold secrets to Israel, leading to the execution of CIA assets in Russia. Pollard's handlers had promised Israel would never spy on America again. Yet here was Franklin, a new mole, funneling intelligence through AIPAC, a group that Israel insisted was merely a legitimate lobby. But the FBI knew better. Agents traced Franklin's network to neoconservative hawks like Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith, architects of the Iraq War, who'd long advocated for regime change in Iran. Feith's Office of Special Plans, a rogue Pentagon unit, had cherry-picked intelligence to justify invading Iraq. Now, the same players were pushing for war with Iran, aided by classified leaks. The FBI's investigation was a ticking time bomb. By 2005, Franklin cracked under pressure, pleading guilty to espionage. But Rosen and Weissman fought back, claiming they were mere conduits in Washington's leak-happy culture. Their defense? Everyone does it. Prosecutors faced a nightmare. Judge T.S. Ellis III ruled that sharing secrets with allies like Israel wasn't inherently criminal, unless intent to harm the U.S. could be proven. The Justice Department faltered. Key witnesses, including Condoleezza Rice, would testify that AIPAC's back-channel diplomacy was sanctioned by the Bush administration. By 2009, the case collapsed. Charges were dropped, and Franklin's sentence was slashed to 10 months of house arrest. The message was clear. Some spies operate above the law. Declassified FBI files paint a chilling picture. AIPAC wasn't just leaking, it was stealing. In the 1980s, Israeli operatives circulated classified U.S. trade documents in Congress, undermining presidential authority. One Israeli minister, Dan Halpern, admitted passing stolen secrets to AIPAC, but invoked diplomatic immunity. Another report detailed how AIPAC staffers photocopied classified files after being ordered to return them. The Franklin affair was a microcosm of a deeper rot. Neoconservatives like Michael Ledeen and Richard Pearl, veterans of the Iran-Contra scandal, had long exploited their ties to Israel. The Office of Special Plans became a nexus for Likud-aligned ideologues who manipulated intelligence to serve Israeli interests. Karen Kwiatkowski, a Pentagon whistleblower, recalled Israeli generals striding unchecked into Feith's office. No sign-in, no paper trail. They knew exactly where they were going, she said. The fallout was explosive yet fleeting. AIPAC emerged unscathed, its influence undiminished. Franklin faded into obscurity, his name a footnote in the annals of espionage. But the case left haunting questions. How many secrets had slipped through the cracks? How many policies were shaped by foreign hands? In 2010, newly released FBI files confirmed the worst. Israel's lobby had not only infiltrated Washington, it had weaponized it. Classified cables, economic sabotage, and a cabal of Likud loyalists had bent you. U.S. power to their will. And as the dust settled, one truth lingered. In the shadowy realm of spies and lobbyists, America's allies could be its most dangerous foes. Chapter 7. The NUMEC Affair. Israel's alleged nuclear material smuggling. In the mid-1960s, the quiet town of Apollo, Pennsylvania, became the epicenter of a shadowy narrative that would send ripples through international corridors of power. At the heart of this unfolding drama was the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, a facility ostensibly dedicated to the peaceful pursuit of nuclear energy. Yet, beneath its unassuming exterior, NUMEC was allegedly entangled in a clandestine operation that saw highly enriched uranium diverted to fuel Israel's nascent nuclear weapons program, a covert endeavor that would later be shrouded in controversy and intrigue. The story began innocuously enough. NUMEC, under the leadership of Dr. Zalman Shapiro, a metallurgist with a sterling reputation, was contracted to process highly enriched uranium for the U.S. Navy's nuclear submarines. However, in 1965, routine audits by the Atomic Energy Commission unveiled a perplexing anomaly. Approximately 200 pounds of HEU were unaccounted for. This was not a mere clerical error. The missing quantity was sufficient to construct several nuclear warheads. Dr. Shapiro attributed the discrepancy to measurement inaccuracies and the inherent challenges of handling such volatile materials. Yet, as the audits continued, the unexplained losses persisted, casting a long shadow of suspicion over NUMEC's operations. Dr. Shapiro's personal affiliations further fueled the growing unease. A prominent figure in Jewish philanthropic circles, he maintained close ties with Israeli officials. Notably, NUMEC hosted several Israeli visitors, including Avraham Hermoni, the scientific counselor at the Israeli embassy in Washington, and Raphael Eitan, a high-ranking Mossad operative renowned for his role in capturing Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann. Eitan's visit in 1968, under the guise of discussing thermoelectric generator systems, raised particular concern among U.S. intelligence agencies. The presence of such a formidable intelligence figure at a facility already under scrutiny for missing nuclear material was more than coincidental. It hinted at a covert operation of international proportions. The FBI and the CIA launched extensive investigations into the matter. Declassified documents reveal that the CIA harbored strong suspicions about the diversion of nuclear material to Israel. A 1978 memorandum from CIA Deputy Director Carl Duckett suggested that NUMEC's missing uranium had indeed been transferred to the Israeli government, bolstering their clandestine nuclear arsenal. Despite these suspicions, the investigations were fraught with challenges. Legal constraints, tremendous pressure from Israeli lobby groups, diplomatic sensitivities, and a lack of concrete evidence hindered efforts to prosecute those involved. Dr. Shapiro consistently denied any wrongdoing, maintaining that the missing uranium was the result of accounting errors and processing inefficiencies. No formal charges were ever filed against him or NUMEC, and the true fate of the missing uranium remains shrouded in mystery. The NUMEC affair underscores the complex interplay between national security interests, international alliances, and the clandestine nature of nuclear proliferation. While definitive proof of the diversion remains elusive, the circumstantial evidence has fueled decades of debate and speculation. This episode serves as a stark reminder of the challenges inherent in safeguarding nuclear materials and the lengths to which nations may go to secure their strategic objectives. In the years that followed, the NUMEC affair continued to cast a long shadow over U.S.-Israeli relations. It highlighted the intricate web of international politics, where strategic alliances and lobby pressures can sometimes blur the lines of legal and ethical conduct. Chapter 8. Operation Butterfly, Mossad's alleged role in monitoring Arab Americans. In the dim glow of a secure Tel Aviv facility, a Mossad analyst scribbles notes on a dossier labeled U.S. Muslim networks. The year is 2002. The World Trade Center's dust has barely settled, but the gears of shadow warfare are already turning. A classified cable from Washington hums on a screen. Coordination essential. Targets: mosques, student groups, activists. The analyst smirks. For decades, Israel's intelligence apparatus had cultivated assets within America's Arab communities. Now post 9/11, the game had escalated. This was no ordinary counterterrorism operation. It was a silent invasion, a spider's web spun across oceans, ensnaring Arab Americans in a labyrinth of surveillance, betrayal, and fear. Long before 9/11, the U.S. government had weaponized suspicion against Arab communities. In 1972, Nixon's Operation Boulder launched a nationwide dragnet, scrutinizing Arab immigrants under the guise of national security after the Munich Olympics attack. Visa applications were denied. Families were torn apart. Informants lurked in universities, cafes, and mosques. Yet, as Arab American lawyer Abdeen Jabara discovered, the true aim was not stopping terrorism, it was crushing dissent. Jabara's bank accounts were monitored. His phone lines crackled with static. FBI files revealed transcripts of his speeches, travel logs, even grocery lists. They wanted to destroy our political voice, he later said, to make us afraid of our own shadows. But Operation Boulder was just the beginning. By the 1990s, Israeli intelligence had perfected its playbook. Mossad's Qassam officers, elite spies, infiltrated diaspora communities, recruiting Cyanim Jewish volunteers who provided logistical support. Fake IDs, safe houses, surveillance tech. One such asset, a New York car rental manager, helped agents vanish into thin air. Another, a tech CEO in Silicon Valley, funneled data to Tel Aviv. Then came 9/11. In the chaos, Mossad saw opportunity. The CIA and FBI, desperate for leads, opened their databases to foreign allies. Israeli operatives flooded into the U.S., posing as students, businessmen, even journalists. Their mission: track high-risk Arab Americans linked to groups like Students for Justice in Palestine or the Council on American Islamic Relations. But Mossad's methods were reckless. In 2002, 5 Israelis were arrested in New Jersey, filming the Statue of Liberty from a van packed with explosives residue. Their company, Urban Moving Systems, was a Mossad front. Interrogators found passports from multiple countries and $4,700 in cash. The FBI noted their unusual interest in the 9/11 attacks. Deported quietly, the incident vanished from headlines. December 2021, a care staffer in Ohio notices discrepancies in meeting logs. Hidden cameras, missing files. A mole had burrowed deep. Roman Iqbal, the group's legal director, had been leaking secrets to the Investigative Project on Terrorism, a shadowy anti-Muslim group tied to Israeli intelligence. Emails obtained by CARE showed IPT's director, Stephen Emerson, exchanging dossiers with Israeli officials. Targets included Palestinian activists, imams, even college students. They wanted names, a CARE insider whispered. Anyone who criticized Israel. The plot thickened. A second spy emerged, a mosque volunteer in Texas, paid to document attendees. They knew who donated to Gaza relief, said a community leader, who spoke at rallies, who had family in the West Bank. Mossad's fingerprints were everywhere. A leaked 2014 Mossad document, The Struggle of Islamic Regimes, revealed a chilling strategy: grade Arab governments on promoting state-approved Islam. Saudi Arabia earned top marks for its ideological security program, brainwashing detainees, censoring sermons, crushing the Muslim Brotherhood. Moderate Islam, the report sneered, is a tool for control. In the U.S., this meant sidelining critics of Israel. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces partnered with pro-Israel groups like the Anti-Defamation League, sharing intelligence on Arab activists. A 2011 study exposed ADL's files on radical mosques, data later used to justify NYPD's infamous Muslim surveillance program. Behind closed doors, U.S. officials seethed. Mossad's rogue operations risked diplomatic fires. In 2004, the CIA intercepted Mossad agents bribing a Maryland student to bug a Palestinian professor's office. They're out of control, a State Department memo warned. Yet cooperation continued. When the FBI probed Saudi ties to 9/11, Operation Encore, agents hit walls. Key witnesses vanished. Files were classified. Retired agent Daniel Gonzalez, who chased leads for years, accused the Bureau of bowing to Saudi-Israeli pressure. Truth? National security eats truth for breakfast. Today, Arab Americans still feel the eyes. A Chicago imam finds his car vandalized after criticizing Israel. A student in Brooklyn deletes social media posts, fearing immigration raids. CARE warns of spyware in prayer apps. Mossad's game endures. In 2021, a Tel Aviv startup funded by Mossad's venture arm developed AI to scan U.S. social media for anti-Israel sentiment. The codename? Operation Butterfly, a nod to agents who flutter unseen, sowing discord, harvesting secrets. Whispers linger in Langley corridors. How much did Washington know? Emails between Emerson and Netanyahu's office gather dust in sealed courts. Families of 9/11 victims demand answers, but the DOJ invokes state secrets. Meanwhile, in a Brooklyn mosque, a man prays, unaware his phone's GPS pings a server in Israel. The web tightens. The truth? It's buried too deep. Chapter 9. The 9/11 Dancing Israelis Controversy. The morning of September 11th, 2001, dawned clear and bright over New York City. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind of day that makes you believe, for a moment, that nothing could go wrong. But by 8:46 a.m., the world had changed forever. American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and within hours, the Twin Towers were reduced to smoldering rubble, taking nearly 3,000 lives with them. Amid the chaos, the screams, and the ash-covered streets, a strange and chilling story began to unfold. One that would raise questions about the role of 5 Israeli men and their possible connection to the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil. It started with a call to the police. A van had been spotted on the roof of a parking garage in Weehawken, New Jersey, just across the Hudson River from Manhattan. Inside the van were 5 men, all in their 20s, acting suspiciously. They were laughing, taking pictures, and filming the burning towers. But what struck witnesses most was their demeanor. They weren't horrified. They weren't crying or praying. They were celebrating. One witness described them as high-fiving and dancing as the towers collapsed. When confronted, the men claimed they were art students, documenting the tragedy for a film project. But something about their story didn't add up. The police detained the men and called the FBI. What followed was a bizarre and unsettling investigation that would lead to more questions than answers. The 5 Israelis, Sivan and Paul Kurzberg, Oded Elner, Omer Marmari, and Yaron Shmuel, were taken into custody. Their van was searched, and what investigators found was alarming. Inside were box cutters, multiple passports, for $1,700 in cash, and maps of New York City with certain locations highlighted. Most damningly, there were photographs of the men posing in front of the World Trade Center, smiling broadly. The FBI's interest in the men deepened. Who were these people? Why were they filming the attacks? And why did they seem so happy? As agents dug deeper, they uncovered a web of connections that pointed to something far more sinister than a group of art students. The men were employees of Urban Moving Systems, a moving company based in New Jersey. But Urban Moving Systems wasn't your average moving company. It was a front, a Mossad front, according to some investigators. The company's owner, Dominic Suter, fled to Israel shortly after the attacks, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The FBI's investigation revealed that the 5 Israelis had been under surveillance for months. They had been spotted in suspicious locations, including near sensitive government buildings and nuclear facilities. One of the men, Paul Kurzberg, had even made a phone call to his brother in Israel on the morning of 9/11, saying, "We did it." When questioned, Kurzberg claimed he was referring to filming the attacks, but the FBI wasn't convinced. The men were held for 71 days, interrogated repeatedly, and subjected to polygraph tests. Eventually, they were deported back to Israel for visa violations, not for any direct involvement in the attacks. But the case was far from closed. The story of the dancing Israelis became a lightning rod for controversy. Conspiracy theorists seized on it, claiming it was proof of Israeli foreknowledge of the attacks. More mainstream voices dismissed the allegations as baseless and anti-Semitic. But the facts, as they emerged, were hard to ignore. In 2002, ABC News reported that the FBI had investigated whether Israel had prior knowledge of 9/11 and whether the men were part of a Mossad surveillance operation. The report cited a classified FBI document that stated, "There is no indication that the 5 Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but there is a suspicion that they were spying on the U.S. and may have known about the attacks in advance." The implications were staggering. If the Israelis had foreknowledge of the attacks, why didn't they warn the U.S.? Were they gathering intelligence for their own purposes, even as thousands of innocent people died? Or was there something even darker at play? The FBI never found conclusive evidence to link the men directly to the attacks, but the questions lingered. Why were they celebrating? Why did they have maps and cash and box cutters? And why did their boss flee the country? The Israeli government, for its part, denied any involvement. They called the allegations absurd and offensive, insisting that the men were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the denials did little to quell the speculation. In Israel, the story took on a life of its own. One of the men, Oded Elner, gave an interview to an Israeli newspaper in which he admitted, "We were there to document the event." He claimed they were filming for an Israeli TV station, but no such footage was ever aired. Another of the men, Savon Kurzberg, was quoted as saying, "The United States is a country where you can do whatever you want." The statement, taken out of context or not, sent chills down the spines of those who read it. The controversy didn't end with the men's deportation. In 2004, a lawsuit was filed against Urban Moving Systems by the families of 9/11 victims, alleging that the company was a Mossad front and that the men had prior knowledge of the attacks. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the questions remained. Why were the men so close to the attacks? Why were they filming? And why did they seem so gleeful? The story of the dancing Israelis is one of the most haunting and enigmatic chapters of the 9/11 saga. It's a story that raises more questions than it answers. A story that lingers in the shadows of one of the darkest days in American history. Were the men simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, as the Israeli government claims? Or were they part of something far more sinister? The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. On that bright, terrible morning, as the towers burned and the world watched in horror, 5 men danced. And the world has been trying to figure out why ever since. Chapter 10. The Carl Cameron Fox News Report. Israeli wiretapping allegations. On December 11th, 2001, Fox News aired a bombshell 4-part series that sent shockwaves through Washington. Investigative reporter Carl Cameron revealed a clandestine operation. Over 140 Israelis had been detained in the U.S. as part of a sprawling probe into suspected espionage. The report alleged that Israeli art students and tech workers had infiltrated military bases, FBI offices, and even the private homes of law enforcement agents under the guise of selling cheap paintings or toys. But the most explosive claim? That Israeli spies might have known about the 9/11 attacks in advance and said nothing. Within days, the series vanished from Fox's website. No explanation, no retraction, only whispers of pressure from pro-Israeli lobbyists and a chilling message. Evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. At the heart of the scandal lay Amdocs Ltd., an Israeli telecom giant that handled billing data for nearly every call in America. Its systems tracked who you called, when, and for how long, a goldmine for intelligence. A classified NSA report warned that foreign hands in Israel were siphoning this data, potentially compromising U.S. counterterrorism efforts. Even more sinister was Converse Infosys, an Israeli wiretapping contractor for the U.S. government. Its wiretap rooms were designed to intercept and store sensitive calls. But investigators discovered a backdoor. Data was secretly routed to Israel. One Amdocs employee had installed a direct T1 line from St. Louis to Tel Aviv, enabling real-time eavesdropping on the White House and Pentagon. When FBI agents sought an arrest warrant, the Clinton Justice Department shut it down. Anything involving Israel is off limits, a senior official hissed. Months before 9/11, a wave of young Israelis flooded U.S. cities. They claimed to be art students from Jerusalem's Bezalel Academy, hawking cheap paintings door to door. But their targets were no ordinary homes. They stalked DEA agents, FBI officials, and military bases like Oklahoma's Tinker Air Force Base, home to nuclear bombers. A leaked DA memo labeled them an organized intelligence gathering activity. Many admitted to serving in Israeli military intelligence or electronic surveillance units. Stranger still, their addresses overlapped with known al-Qaeda cells in Florida and Texas. Were they spying on the terrorists or with them? On the morning of 9/11, as the Twin Towers burned, 5 Israelis in a white Chevy van marked Urban Moving Systems were caught celebrating in New Jersey. A witness, Maria, saw them filming the carnage, jumping, high-fiving, and laughing as bodies fell. Police found $4,700 in cash, multiple passports, and box cutters, the same tool used by the hijackers. The van's owner, Dominic Suter, fled to Israel hours before the FBI could re-interview him. His employees joked about the attacks. Now America knows what we go through. The FBI's Foreign Counterintelligence Section took over the case, but key evidence, 8,000 emergency call logs from 9/11, vanished after a Jersey City mayor's sudden death and a suspicious server crash. The Fox report hinted at darker truths. Over 60 Israelis were detained post 9/11, some failing polygraph tests about surveillance activities. One group allegedly spied on Arabs in California linked to terrorism. How could they not have known? A source muttered to Cameron. But the U.S. government clammed up. Colin Powell deferred questions. The FBI dismissed the art students as visa violators. Meanwhile, Amdocs and Converse denied wrongdoing, even as their systems remained embedded in America's communication backbone. Jewish groups called the story baseless and insidious, fearing it would fuel anti-Semitism. Yet Fox stood by its reporting. The unanswered questions lingered like a fog. Why were Mossad-linked firms wiring U.S. secrets to Tel Aviv? Why did a DEA memo warn of Israeli spies working with Islamic fundamentalists? And what did Israel know about 9/11 that it never shared? The files remain classified. The witnesses stay silent. And the white van? It's still parked in the shadows of history, engine cold, secrets intact. The truth, they say, is the first casualty of war. But in this tale, it was buried alive. Chapter 11. The Case of Ben-Ami Kadish, another Pollard-Style spy. In the quiet retirement community of Monroe Township, New Jersey, an 85-year-old man shuffled into his living room, leaning heavily on a cane. To his neighbors, Ben-Ami Kadish was a frail grandfather figure, a volunteer, a synagogue regular, a man who delivered meals to the sick. But behind the veneer of respectability lurked a darker truth. Kadish was a spy. For years, he had funneled America's most guarded military secrets to Israel, operating in the shadows of the Cold War, his crimes buried for decades. When the FBI finally closed in on him in 2008, they uncovered a web of espionage that echoed one of the most infamous betrayals in U.S. history, the Jonathan Pollard affair. The story begins in the early 1980s at Picatinny Arsenal, a sprawling U.S. Army research complex in New Jersey. Kadish, a mechanical engineer with a top-secret clearance, worked here for 27 years. But his loyalty wasn't to the Stars and Stripes. Born in Connecticut but raised in Mandatory Palestine, Kadish had fought with the Haganah, a precursor to the Israeli Defense Forces, and carried a lifelong zeal for Zionism. Enter Yosef Yeager, a science advisor at the Israeli consulate in New York. To U.S. counterintelligence, Yeager was a familiar name. He'd been Pollard's handler, orchestrating the theft of troves of classified Navy intelligence before fleeing the U.S. in 1985. Now, court documents revealed Yeager had another asset, Kadish. The operation was chillingly simple. Yeager gave Kadish lists of documents to steal, nuclear weapon blueprints, schematics for modified F-15 jets, secrets about the Patriot missile system. Kadish would check them out from Picatinny's secure library, stuff them into his briefcase, and hand them over at his home. Yeager photographed the files in Kadish's basement, vanishing into the night with America's defenses laid bare. The parallels to Pollard were uncanny. Both spies were cultivated by the same handler. Both exploited lax security at U.S. facilities. Both claimed they acted out of love for Israel. Not greed, Kadish accepted only small gifts and dinners, no cash. But the damage was real. The leaked F-15 intel jeopardized jets sold to allies like Saudi Arabia. The nuclear data? A Pandora's box of atomic secrets. Yet unlike Pollard, whose 1987 life sentence made headlines, Kadish's crime stayed hidden for 23 years. Why? The answer reeked of geopolitical maneuvering. When Pollard was caught, Israel promised to halt espionage on U.S. soil. But Kadish's arrest in 2008 exposed that vow is hollow. His spying had overlapped with Pollard's, suggesting a broader, unchecked network. The FBI's breakthrough came in 2008, not through high-tech surveillance, but a slip of the tongue. During an interrogation, Kadish admitted to agents that Yeager, still in Israel, had called him weeks earlier. "Don't say anything," Yeager urged. "You don't remember." It was a desperate ploy to bury the past, but the damage was done. Phone records revealed 22 calls between Kadish and Yeager in 1985 alone. Worse, the two had met in Israel as recently as 2004. Proof the conspiracy never truly ended. At his 2009 sentencing, Kadish faced life in prison. Instead, he walked free. Judge William Pauley, baffled by the 23-year delay in charges, called the case shrouded in mystery but spared the octogenarian jail time, citing his age and cooperation. A $50,000 fine was the only slap on the wrist. Critics were furious. Was this justice, or a quiet deal to avoid embarrassing Israel further? Kadish's apology, "I thought I was helping Israel without harming the U.S.," rang hollow. Pollard's leaks had reached the Soviets. Who else saw Kadish's secrets? The Patriot missile files, stolen in the 1980s, resurfaced in Israeli hands during the Gulf War. Coincidence? Or calculated exploitation? The Kadish case laid bare Mossad's playbook. Recruit ideologues, not mercenaries. Kadish's World War II service, his Zionist fervor, his unassuming persona, all made him the perfect sleeper agent. Yeager, the handler who vanished like a ghost, exemplified Israel's strategy of plausible deniability. Even today, experts suspect more moles remain undetected. They had other people supplying information, fumed former prosecutor Joseph DiGenova. You protect your ultimate source. Ben-Ami Kadish died in 2012, his secrets buried with him. But the questions live on. Why did the U.S. wait decades to charge him? Was his light sentence a tacit admission that exposing Israel's spy ring would rupture an already fragile alliance? And what of Yosef Yeager, still free in Israel, his role in both the Pollard and Kadish affairs never prosecuted? In the end, the case is a grim reminder. Allies today can be adversaries tomorrow. And in the shadow wars of espionage, loyalty is a currency. One Israel has mastered spending at America's expense. Chapter 12. Operation Cassandra, alleged Mossad-Hizbollah drug trade disruption in the U.S. The night was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the air like a predator stalking its prey. Somewhere in the shadows of New York City, a clandestine operation was unfolding, one that would blur the lines between ally and adversary, justice and betrayal. This was no ordinary counter-narcotics raid. This was a high-stakes game of espionage, where the players wore masks of friendship while their knives gleamed in the dark. At the center of it all was the Mossad, Israel's feared intelligence agency, and its alleged manipulation of U.S. counter-narcotics operations targeting Hezbollah's sprawling drug networks. The story of Operation Cassandra was about to take a sinister turn. It began with a whisper, a rumor that Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group, was funding its global operations through a vast drug trafficking network stretching from South America to Europe and into the United States. The DEA had been tracking this network for years, painstakingly piecing together a puzzle that spanned continents. The operation, codenamed Cassandra, was their magnum opus, a chance to dismantle Hezbollah's financial backbone and strike a blow against one of the world's most dangerous organizations. But there was a problem. The Mossad had its own agenda. For years, Israeli intelligence had been monitoring Hezbollah's activities with a singular focus: to neutralize the group at any cost. To the Mossad, Hezbollah wasn't just a threat, it was an existential enemy. And when the DEA's Operation Cassandra began to gain traction, the Mossad saw an opportunity, not to help their American allies, but to exploit them. The first signs of trouble came in 2008. DEA agents working on Cassandra noticed something strange. Key suspects in their investigation were disappearing. Not in the usual way, arrested, killed, or gone to ground, but vanishing as if plucked from the board by an unseen hand. Informants went silent. Wiretaps went dead. And then there were the bodies. In one particularly gruesome case, a Lebanese businessman named Hassan Hodrich, suspected of funneling drug money to Hezbollah, was found dead in his apartment in Beirut. The scene was a bloodbath, the kind of overkill that screamed message. Hodrich had been shot multiple times, his body mutilated. The Mossad was rumored to be behind the hit, though no one could prove it. What was clear, however, was that Hodrich had been a person of interest in the DEA's investigation. His death wasn't just a setback, it was a warning. As the years went on, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Time and again, just as the DEA was closing in on a target, something would happen. A suspect would be killed in a drone strike in Syria. A shipment of cocaine would mysteriously vanish off the coast of West Africa. A key player would be arrested, not by the Americans, but by a foreign government with close ties to Israel. The Mossad, it seemed, was running its own parallel operation, one that didn't just overlap with Cassandra, but actively undermined it. The Americans were furious. They were supposed to be our allies, one former day agent later recalled, his voice still tinged with anger. But instead of helping us, they were cutting our legs out from under us. Every time we got close, they'd swoop in and take the prize for themselves. It was like playing chess against someone who kept changing the rules. The breaking point came in 2011. The DEA had been tracking a massive drug shipment, tons of cocaine, headed for Europe. The drugs were tied to Hezbollah, and intercepting them would have been a major victory for Operation Cassandra. But just as the DEA was preparing to move, the Mossad stepped in. According to sources within the agency, Israeli operatives tipped off European authorities, who seized the drugs before the Americans could act. The DEA was left empty-handed, their investigation thrown into disarray. To make matters worse, the Mossad's intervention wasn't just about stealing the glory. It was about control. By taking out key players in Hezbollah's network, the Israelis were effectively reshaping the battlefield to suit their own needs. But in doing so, they were also jeopardizing the DEA's ability to build a comprehensive case against the organization. It was like they were playing whack-a-mole, another agent said. Every time we got close to connecting the dots, they'd smash the board. The tension between the two agencies reached a boiling point in 2015. By then, Operation Cassandra had been running for nearly a decade, and the DEA was finally on the verge of a major breakthrough. They had identified a network of Hezbollah operatives in the U.S., men who were using the drug trade to fund the group's activities abroad. It was the kind of case that could make careers and change the course of the fight against global terrorism. But once again, the Mossad intervened. According to multiple sources, Israeli operatives began surveilling the same targets the DEA was watching. At first, the Americans tried to play nice, sharing intelligence and coordinating their efforts. But it quickly became clear that the Mossad had no intention of playing by the rules. They were running their own operation on American soil, and they weren't about to let the DEA get in their way. The final straw came when the Mossad allegedly tried to recruit one of the DEA's informants. The informant, a Lebanese national with ties to Hezbollah, had been working with the Americans for years, providing crucial information about the group's drug operations. But when the Mossad approached him, they offered him a deal. Work for us, and we'll protect you. The informant refused, but the damage was done. The DEA had lost trust in their Israeli counterparts, and the relationship between the two agencies was irreparably fractured. By 2017, Operation Cassandra was all but dead. The DEA had managed to indict a handful of Hezbollah operatives, but the broader network remained intact. The Mossad, meanwhile, continued to pursue its own agenda, targeting Hezbollah with a ruthlessness that left little room for collaboration. To the Americans, it was a bitter pill to swallow. They had poured years of work into Cassandra, only to see it undermined by their so-called allies. But to the Israelis, it was simply the cost of doing business. In their eyes, Hezbollah was a threat that needed to be eliminated by any means necessary. If that meant stepping on a few toes, or even breaking a few laws, so be it. As one former Mossad operative put it, when you're fighting a war, you don't stop to ask for permission. You do what needs to be done. The story of Operation Cassandra is a chilling reminder of the dark side of intelligence work. It's a world where alliances are fragile, trust is a liability, and the ends always justify the means. For the DEA, it was a lesson in the limits of cooperation. For the Mossad, it was just another day at the office. Chapter 13. Black Cube's U.S. Operations. Mossad Veterans in Private Espionage. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. A man in a tailored suit sat at a sleek desk, his face obscured by shadows. His fingers danced across a keyboard, typing commands that would set in motion a series of events no one would see coming. Behind him, a wall of monitors flickered with faces, names, and locations, targets. These were not terrorists or enemy combatants. They were journalists, activists, and U.S. officials. And the man at the desk? He was no ordinary operative. He was a veteran of Mossad, Israel's feared intelligence agency, now working for Black Cube, a private espionage firm that operated in the darkest corners of the world. Black Cube was no ordinary company. Founded in 2010 by former Israeli intelligence officers, it marketed itself as a litigation support firm. But its real business was far more sinister. Black Cube specialized in corporate espionage, political manipulation, and targeted smear campaigns. Its operatives were handpicked from the ranks of Mossad, Shin Bet, and other Israeli intelligence units. They were trained in the art of deception, surveillance, and psychological warfare. And they brought their skills to the United States, where they operated with chilling precision. The story of Black Cube's U.S. operations is not just a tale of espionage. It's a story of how a foreign intelligence network infiltrated American soil, targeting individuals who dared to challenge powerful interests. It's a story of how Israeli operatives, armed with cutting-edge technology and decades of experience, turned the art of spying into a lucrative business. And it's a story that raises disturbing questions about the reach of foreign influence in American affairs. The name Harvey Weinstein is synonymous with scandal. The disgraced Hollywood producer was accused of sexual assault by dozens of women, sparking the Me Too movement. But long before the allegations became public, Weinstein was working behind the scenes to silence his accusers. And he had help. In 2016, Weinstein hired Black Cube to dig up dirt on his accusers and the journalists investigating him. The operatives went to work with ruthless efficiency. They created fake identities, posed as journalists and women's rights advocates, and infiltrated the circles of Weinstein's targets. One operative, using the alias Anna, befriended Rose McGowan, one of Weinstein's most vocal accusers. For months, Anna gained McGowan's trust, extracting sensitive information that was later used to discredit her. Another operative, posing as a feminist activist, met with Ronan Farrow, the journalist who was investigating Weinstein for The New Yorker. The operative tried to coax information out of Farrow, even offering to collaborate on his reporting. It was a brazen attempt to undermine Farrow's investigation and protect Weinstein's reputation. When the story broke, the world was outraged, not just at Weinstein, but at the shadowy firm that had enabled his abuses. Black Cube's involvement in the scandal exposed a disturbing truth. The line between corporate espionage and personal destruction was razor thin. And for Black Cube, it was all in a day's work. The Weinstein scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. Black Cube's operations in the U.S. extended far beyond Hollywood. In 2017, the firm was hired by an undisclosed client to investigate Obama administration officials who had been involved in the Iran nuclear deal. The operatives targeted Ben Rhodes, a former deputy national security advisor, and Colin Kahl, a former national security advisor to Vice President Joe Biden. Using fake identities, Black Cube operatives approached Rhodes and Kahl, posing as journalists and researchers. They tried to extract information about the Iran deal, which had been fiercely opposed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The goal was clear: to gather intelligence that could be used to undermine the deal and advance Israel's political agenda. The operation was a stark reminder of how far Black Cube was willing to go. These were not corporate executives or private individuals. They were former U.S. officials, men who had served at the highest levels of government, and they were being targeted by a foreign intelligence network operating on American soil. Black Cube's targets weren't limited to the powerful. The firm also went after activists and NGOs that criticized Israel's policies. In one case, Black Cube was hired to investigate the Open Society Foundations, a philanthropic organization founded by George Soros. The firm's operatives infiltrated the organization, gathering information on its funding and operations. In another case, Black Cube targeted pro-Palestinian activists in the U.S. The operatives used fake social media profiles to befriend activists, gaining access to their networks and gathering intelligence on their activities. The information was later used to discredit the activists and undermine their campaigns. These operations were part of a broader strategy to silence dissent and protect Israel's interests. By targeting activists and NGOs, Black Cube sought to neutralize critics of Israel's policies and maintain the status quo. What made Black Cube so effective was its use of cutting-edge technology and old-school spycraft. The firm's operatives were experts in surveillance, hacking, and psychological manipulation. They used fake identities, hidden cameras, and sophisticated software to gather intelligence on their targets. But perhaps their most powerful weapon was their ability to blend in. Black Cube operatives were masters of disguise, able to infiltrate any environment and gain the trust of their targets. They posed as journalists, researchers, and activists, using their cover stories to extract information and manipulate their targets. The firm's operations were meticulously planned and executed. Each mission was tailored to the target, with operatives using a combination of charm, deception, and intimidation to achieve their goals. And because Black Cube operated in the shadows, its targets often had no idea they were being watched. Black Cube's U.S. operations raised troubling questions about the reach of foreign influence in American affairs. The firm's operatives were not just corporate spies. They were veterans of Israeli intelligence, men and women who had been trained by one of the most feared spy agencies in the world. And they were using their skills to target U.S. officials, activists, and journalists. The implications are chilling. If a foreign intelligence network can operate with impunity on American soil, what does that say about the state of U.S. national security? And if private firms like Black Cube can be hired to target individuals, what's to stop them from being used as tools of political repression? The story of Black Cube is a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that in the world of espionage, the lines between friend and foe, public and private, are often blurred. And it's a warning that in the shadows, there are forces at work that we may never fully understand. But one thing is clear. Black Cube's operations in the U.S. were not just about gathering intelligence. They were about power to manipulate, to intimidate, to destroy. And in a world where information is the ultimate weapon, that power is more dangerous than ever. The monitors flickered again, casting an eerie glow on the man at the desk. He leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. Another mission accomplished, another target neutralized, and in the shadows, the game went on. Chapter 14, The Epstein-Mossad Connection, Espionage, Blackmail, and Intelligence Links. The story of Jeffrey Epstein is not just a tale of a wealthy financier with a penchant for young girls. It is a labyrinth of power, secrecy, and international intrigue that stretches far beyond the confines of his private island or his opulent mansions. At the heart of this labyrinth lies a question that has haunted investigators, journalists, and conspiracy theorists alike. Was Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad asset? The whispers are persistent, the evidence circumstantial but chilling, and the implications explosive. This is not just a story about a predator. It is a story about espionage, blackmail, and the shadowy world of intelligence operations that may have used Epstein as a pawn or a weapon. The first thread of this dark tapestry begins with Epstein's mysterious rise to wealth. How did a college dropout with no discernible financial acumen amass a fortune estimated at over $500 million? Epstein's official story, that he made his money through savvy investments and managing the wealth of billionaires, has always been flimsy. Those who dug deeper found gaps, inconsistencies, and a trail that led to powerful figures in the world of finance, politics, and intelligence. Among them, Israeli connections stand out. Epstein's ties to Israel were no secret. He was a frequent visitor to the country, rubbing shoulders with politicians, businessmen, and military figures. He donated generously to Israeli causes, including the Technion Israel Institute of Technology, and was photographed with prominent Israeli leaders. But it was his relationship with Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister and defense minister, that raised eyebrows. Barak visited Epstein's New York mansion multiple times, even after Epstein's first conviction for sex crimes in 2008. Barak later claimed he was unaware of Epstein's crimes, but the optics were damning. Why would a man of Barak's stature maintain such a close association with a convicted sex offender? The answer, some believe, lies in Epstein's potential role as a Mossad operative. Mossad is known for its ruthless efficiency and willingness to operate in the grayest areas of international espionage. Its motto, by way of deception, thou shalt do war, speaks volumes about its methods. Epstein, with his vast network of influential friends and his ability to lure powerful men into compromising situations, would have been an invaluable asset. His private jets, his secluded island, and his mansions were not just playgrounds for the rich and perverse. They were potential honey traps designed to ensnare the elite. Theories about Epstein's role as a Mossad operative gained traction after his arrest in 2019. Investigators discovered a trove of evidence suggesting that Epstein had been collecting blackmail material on some of the most powerful people in the world. Hidden cameras, recordings, and meticulously kept records pointed to a sophisticated operation. But who was this information for? Epstein himself had no obvious use for it. He was already wealthy and well-connected. The idea that he was gathering compromat for a foreign intelligence agency, however, fits neatly into the puzzle. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence linking Epstein to Mossad is his relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a British media mogul with deep ties to Israeli intelligence. Robert Maxwell, a larger-than-life figure who died under mysterious circumstances in 1991, was widely believed to have been a Mossad asset. His daughter, Ghislaine, inherited his connections and became Epstein's closest confidant. Together, they formed a formidable duo, hosting parties, arranging massages, and cultivating relationships with politicians, billionaires, and celebrities. If Epstein was the frontman, Maxwell was the fixer, ensuring that the operation ran smoothly. The Maxwell connection is particularly damning. Robert Maxwell's ties to Mossad were so extensive that he was reportedly given a state funeral in Israel, attended by top officials. His death, officially ruled as an accident, has been the subject of countless conspiracy theories. Some believe he was killed because he knew too much. Others think he was involved in a botched intelligence operation. Whatever the truth, his legacy casts a long shadow over his daughter's activities with Epstein. The blackmail angle is where the story takes a truly sinister turn. Epstein's victims were not just young girls. They were also the powerful men who visited his properties. By luring these men into compromising situations, Epstein could have been gathering material to be used against them. The implications are staggering. Imagine a foreign intelligence agency holding sway over U.S. politicians, business leaders, and even members of the military. The potential for manipulation is almost limitless. One of the most chilling aspects of the Epstein case is the sheer number of high-profile individuals who were connected to him. Presidents, princes, and CEOs all found themselves drawn into his orbit. Some, like Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, have faced intense scrutiny for their associations with Epstein. Others have managed to keep their names out of the spotlight, for now. But the question remains, were these men unwittingly caught in a Mossad operation, or were they complicit in some way? The idea that Epstein was running a blackmail operation on behalf of Mossad is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Israel has a long history of using compromat to influence foreign governments. In the 1980s, Jonathan Pollard, an American intelligence analyst, was caught spying for Israel. The Pollard affair strained U.S.-Israel relations, but it also revealed the extent to which Israel was willing to go to protect its interests. If Pollard was a blunt instrument, Epstein was a scalpel, surgically extracting secrets from the highest echelons of power. Theories about Epstein's ties to Mossad have been fueled by the strange circumstances surrounding his death. Officially, Epstein committed suicide in his jail cell in August 2019, but the details of his death are riddled with inconsistencies. The cameras in his cell malfunctioned, the guards failed to check on him regularly, and the autopsy findings were inconclusive. For many, the idea that Epstein was silenced to prevent him from revealing what he knew is all too plausible. If he was indeed a Mossad asset, his death would have been a convenient way to tie up loose ends. The Epstein case is a Pandora's box of secrets, lies, and unanswered questions. It is a story that implicates some of the most powerful people in the world and raises disturbing questions about the lengths to which intelligence agencies will go to achieve their goals. Whether Epstein was a Mossad operative or simply a predator who exploited his connections, the implications are the same. The world of power and privilege is far darker and more dangerous than most of us can imagine. As the investigation into Epstein's activities continues, one thing is clear. This is not just a story about one man's crimes. It is a story about the shadowy forces that operate behind the scenes, manipulating events to their advantage. And it is a story that is far from over. The truth, whatever it may be, is out there, waiting to be uncovered. But beware, those who seek it may find more than they bargained for.